Why use Linux? I use a Linux operating system every day on my laptop, and I have done for several years. Why? Well, in my case, I just find Linux in general to be a bit of a nice change from Windows, and it's a more private option too. I do use Windows at work as an IT guy, and I also did try Mac OS for a few months last year, but I seem to keep coming back to Linux for personal use. I imagine some of you are thinking, well, yeah, you're an IT guy. That's okay for you to talk about some weird, obscure operating system. Linux, though, is pretty sneaky. For example, the Android mobile operating system is based upon Linux, and most modern supercomputers use versions of Linux, as do a large chunk of all the computers that bring you the internet. So Linux kind of hides in plain sight. I won't go into the origins of Linux here, I just want to make you aware of it as a possible alternative to Windows. Well, that's nice and mildly interesting, you might say, but what does it mean for me, a lifelong Windows user? Okay, let's consider that you have an older computer or laptop still running Windows 7 or even Windows XP. If you're connected to the internet with that computer, you're pretty much begging someone to infect it and your stuff with viruses and the like, since those versions don't get security updates anymore. I may not even be able to run the latest web browser versions. In many cases, you could install a modern Linux operating system on that old hardware and maintain a working, up-to-date platform that will keep you more secure and avoid having to buy a new computer. That's a great use case for using Linux instead of an old version of Windows. Did I mention that Linux operating systems are usually free to download and use? But isn't Linux weird and you have to type stuff into that little black window like a hacker? 10 years ago maybe, but I would say that these days it's no more jarring to start using Linux than it was going from Windows 7 to Windows 10. Modern Linux should allow you to do the things you do on your old Windows PC and in generally the same manner. You can use a mouse to navigate around, and many versions of Linux use or can use the same old start button and menu conventions that Windows has for years. Some of you will have noticed that I refer to versions of Linux. What's that all about? Okay, apart from just the notion of using something other than Windows, the sheer bewildering number of choices of Linux versions usually scares off the everyday PC user. It's just too much to deal with when confronted with so many choices. But it may be worth it to you, so take a deep breath. Windows and Mac OS come as whatever the current version is when you buy the desktop computer or laptop. Windows 11 or Mac OS 13 Ventura at the time of recording this. New versions come out from time to time with different features, but when you use Windows, you get the Windows user interface, and with Mac OS, you get the Mac user interface. With Linux, there are quite a few major versions such as Debian, Ubuntu, Fedora, and Arch, and each of these have numerous subversions based upon them. The major versions mentioned differ most noticeably in the way software and system updates are managed, but they essentially use the Linux kernel or core and have the same functionality. The various Linux versions and subversions are referred to as distributions or distros. So why all the versions? Well, most of it comes down to look and feel or workflow, and also some distros include software for more specific tasks, such as audio or video production or gaming, things like that. But don't get bogged down in all that. For a traditional Windows user who has an older computer or laptop and just wants something that sort of looks and acts like Windows and will allow them to get on Facebook or use their banking website, check email, or use YouTube, I can make a few suggestions to narrow things down. There will also be links in the video description below if you want to look into these further. This is assuming that you have a computer that's 10 years old or less. Older than that, and you may actually want to get something newer. Not new necessarily, but more recent for sure. You can get refurbished or off-lease computers for $200 or less that are just fine, from eBay, Amazon, even Walmart. and often your local college will periodically clean out their older hardware for cheap. But I digress. Here are a couple of established Windows-like Linux distros that should run well on older hardware. 1. Zorin OS, Core or Lite. The current version is 16.2 and the Lite version is specifically for older hardware. 2. Linux Mint XFCE edition. The current version is 21.1. 3. Linux Lite. The current version is 6.2. These all come with an Office suite, music and video player, a web browser, and other software, the typical stuff you might need to start using your computer. Some things to note about Linux in general. 1. Linux distros usually allow you to create a live DVD or live USB. Essentially, it allows you to test drive the Linux distro on your PC or laptop without messing up or removing Windows. The Linux distro websites will have guides on how to create the live media. Quite useful. 2. As mentioned previously, most Linux distros come with an Office suite like Libre Office, which allows a pretty good level of compatibility with Microsoft Office documents. In other words, you can usually open and edit any existing Office documents you may have. You also have the option of using the online version of Microsoft Office in Linux if you need a better compatibility. 3. Note that you generally cannot use Windows programs on Linux. Well, you kinda can, but it's funky. Instead, you need to use a similar app that was designed for Linux, which are usually free and available from within the Linux distro's App Store. 4. Printers will typically be plug-and-play, although multifunction printers may need drivers from HP, Canon, etc., and those can be hard to find. Again, this is where the test drive functionality comes in handy. 5. Most people have never even installed an operating system of any kind, and it seems daunting. It's actually pretty straightforward, though. If you created the live DVD or USB mentioned previously, you're halfway there. You can use that to install Linux too. Just make sure and back up any data you want to keep from Windows first. Photos, music, documents, etc. Again, a helpful link is below. Hey, good luck if you want to take a leap of faith and try Linux.